Hi, guys. Welcome to our podcast on the effects of space travel in the human body. We're going to be your hosts. I'm Steven.
I'm Isaac.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Abby.
All right. So, in our podcast, we're going to be talking about first radiation, then we'll go into cardiovascular and skeletal systems and microgravity. And after that, we'll talk about muscle and bone health and end off with nutrition and reproductive hazards. So why is radiation a problem? Well, it's dangerous because it has significant energy to change or break DNA molecules, which can damage or kill a cell. And this can lead to health problems ranging from acute effects to long-term effects. And according to the Lockheed Martin Corporation, your lungs, stomach, colon, bone marrow, and reproductive organs are some of the areas in your body that are most at risk for getting damaged by radiation. Radiation in space may also place astronauts at significant risk for radiation sickness and an increased lifetime risk for cancer. Could also lead to central nervous system problems and degenerative diseases. Furthermore, radiation can alter the cardiovascular system, damaging the heart and narrow arteries. Some of these health effects can skip a generation and appear in descendants of the exposed individual, being passed on by mutated genes. Before I go to the next slide, I really quickly want to discuss something known as the solar particle event, known as SPE. In short, solar particle events, according to the Lockheed Martin Corporation, are intense peaks of radiation lasting hours to days. They occur when protons emitted by the sun become accelerated in the atmosphere during a solar flare. It's difficult to predict when exactly an SPE will occur, but sources such as NASA suggest that they occur roughly 7 times a year. All right, so cosmic radiation and neutrons will be the next topic of radiation. Cosmic radiation from galactic cosmic rays is one of the greatest dangers for people traveling into space. Cosmic ray particles are charged particles that are highly energetic, and they are a form of ionizing radiation. Mikhail Marnov, the author of a scholarly article called Radiation and Spaceflight Safety and Insight, goes more in depth into this topic. According to Marnov, when these particles collide with particles of other objects, they can split their molecules. This can result in the formation of secondary particles, such as neutrons and other subatomic particles. This form of radiation can come from neutrons. Neutrons penetrate matter at a deeper level than other forms of radiation. In humans, neutron radiation can damage cells or even cause them to mutate. These cells can become cancerous or die. It can also reduce bone density in humans. The official podcast of the NASA Johnson Space, titled Houston, We Have a Podcast, refers to spacecrafts and how they are affected by radiation. So I'm going to go into how the radiation affects equipment. Matt Lemke was a guest on the podcast and Gary Jordan was the host. At one point in the podcast, Matt mentions that spacecrafts must weather radiation throughout their entire lives. Long-term radiation can wear down material and gradually reduce instrument performance the longer they are in orbit. Even relatively mild radiation can degrade solar panels and circuitry. Current spacecrafts have multiple lightweight magnetic shields of thin aluminum sheets. These can block out a lot of radiation that astronauts are exposed to. Astronauts must also cover their habitats with protection as well if they're going on long-term missions that deal with them spending time on the moon. Without these techniques, astronauts would have no protection from radiation. And how can we prevent radiation exposure? NASA is actually developing a new radiation detector to monitor and characterize the radiation environment, which will provide better estimates of the dose and type of radiation to which crews are exposed to. Scientists and engineers are optimizing and implementing operational procedures that use available vehicle storage and materials to reduce radiation exposure effectively. To investigate these health risks of space radiation exposure beyond low Earth orbit, NASA supports research that analyzes the biological effects of stimulated cosmic rays at ground-based research facilities. Research at these facilities help NASA understand and reduce the risk of space radiation to ensure proper measurement of the dose that astronauts receive on space station and in future spacecraft, and develop advanced materials that improve radiation shielding for future missions. So do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, actually, I do. So I was wondering, what types of cancer can arise from cosmic radiation?
Good question, Brett. Okay, so the most common types, there's three big main types of cancer. Breast cancer is the first one, and leukemia is another one as well. And prostate cancer in males is the third big one. Females don't really have to worry about that though, because that's not something that they have in their bodies.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, so Isaac, you said you were gonna talk more about the
Yeah. So one of the biggest issue with space travel is the effects of microgravity on the body. And microgravity is any gravity that's in a small percentage compared to Earth, right? We've evolved on Earth. Our bodies are used to the gravitational force we've experienced on Earth. So when you go into situations where there is lower quantities of gravity, then your body starts to have problems. So Frischmann and Shen created this very nice diagram of the distribution of blood and blood pressure and different gravitational forces. So they looked at astronauts pre-flight, in space, and then post-flight. And in pre-flight, you can see nice distribution of blood and blood pressure. Blood pools at the feet, and then that's because it has to combat gravity going back up through the body. And obviously, it's a lot harder to go against gravity. Meanwhile, in microgravity, there's an even distribution of blood pressure throughout the body because there's no forces pushing it down or having to combat to go up. So this results in facial puffiness in the head because that area of the body is not used to such high quantum. Now in microgravity, the body is it's struggling to adapt back to the pressure of gravity that it's used to on Earth. So there's lower blood pressure in the feet and lower blood pressure in the head, resulting in faintness. And then if we look at the next slide, we can talk a little bit about why that is. So Houston et al. In 2018 looked at astronauts pre-flight and post-flight 4 days after coming back from space. So in pre-flight, we're looking at the aorta. It's a large vessel in the chest near the heart. And in pre-flight, everything looks great. There's no issues. It's there's a lot of space. Blood is flowing normally. Now, your heart and the vasculature actually has 3 layers. And when your blood vessels constrict, that results in less blood flow. So post-flight, what we're looking at here is those 3 layers of the vessel separating. So what that means is now blood is getting caught in between those vessels, or in between those layers, and it can't flow as fast and as effectively. So this is a big issue with space travel because microgravity causes the layers to separate, resulting in less efficient blood flow. If we move on to the next slide, we'll take a look at skeletal function. So looking at Blabber et al.'s work from 2013, they sent mice into the ISS on the Discovery 131 rocket. And what they found was that spaceflight and microgravity causes bone loss in the pelvic region of mice. So what we're looking at is the pelvic region of mice in space versus on Earth. And what they found was that in space, actually the microgravity caused more bone loss in the pelvic region when compared to Earth. And then to add on to that, they looked at mRNA expression of genes responsible for bone growth. And what they found is that in microgravity, nearly all of these genes responsible for bone growth were down-regulated. So what that means is microgravity restricts bone growth. However, a third point that Blabber et al. Found was that in spaceflight, because bones are naturally destroyed and rebuilt throughout the course of your life, what they found was that when the bones were destroyed, they weren't replaced with normal bone. They were replaced with collagen. And obviously, that's a big issue. Collagen does not have the same strength and durability as normal bone does. So all of this combines to say that microgravity causes bones to degrade, and instead of rebuilding normally, they're rebuilt with a less durable and less strong material. So if we go to the next slide, we can take a look at one of the potential treatments Ikegame et al. Found in 2019. So similarly to the previous study, they sent goldfish into space. And what they found is melatonin as a potential solution for the lack of bone loss. Again, they looked at a bunch of different genes and proteins responsible for repairing bone. That actually, when they were comparing it to on Earth in microgravity and in microgravity with melatonin, the melatonin microgravity was significantly higher in the expression compared to the regular microgravity. Obviously, it was less than on Earth because you are in microgravity, and as we talked about just a little bit ago, the microgravity actually downregulates those genes. But the important thing is melatonin and microgravity and they were given melatonin. The calcitonin levels were increased. Now, calcitonin is a hormone that's responsible for blood calcium levels, calcium being one of the most important aspects of bones. And when when melatonin was increased, calcitonin levels were increased, which when calcitonin levels are increased, it decreases calcium levels in the blood because bone cells will start to use that calcium to build bones. So melatonin was found to be particularly effective in repairing the scales of goldfish in microgravity. So that was one potential solution that we looked at. And I know you guys probably have a couple questions, so I want to open up to you guys to see what your thoughts on this were.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Isaac. So are there like any differences in bone loss based on gender?
Yeah, so on Earth, naturally, women are more likely to experience bone loss and at a higher percentage just because of hormonal differences between men and women. However, in space, they found no correlation. The researchers found no correlation between gender and bone loss. It was the traditional expected women lose more bone density than men.
Wow, that's cool to know.
Yeah, and I know up next we have Brett to talk about some of the more solutions to combat this.
Yeah, so obviously bones are very important. They help you move, they support your body, they protect your organs, they give you just your overall structure. And so important term to know is bone mass density, which is also referred to as BMD, which is a measurement of how many grams of calcium and other bone minerals are in a segment of bone. This is important to measure osteoporosis and other potential bone problems that you could encounter. So similar to Isaac's previous research, I found an article written by Lawrence Vico and others, which showed microgravity can induce osteoporosis in weight-bearing bones. So a study was performed by Kukoba and others to find the best ways to try and avoid osteoporosis from space travel. So they performed a 2-month travel. They performed a study where a 2-month travel crew and a 6-month travel crew went up into space, and the 2-month travel crew showed minimal loss in their bone mass density, and the 6-month showed very notable decrease in the bone mass density. So the bone that was affected the most was the tibia, and the tibia is used constantly and daily for getting around. So deterioration of this bone is huge. And the time needed to recover is unknown, but it is for sure significantly longer than the mission duration. So yeah, that is huge. And many different things were attempted to minimize the loss in bone mass density. The best strategy used by astronauts was using a machine called a power trainer. Unfortunately, I was unable to find any pictures of this power trainer, but it was huge and showed the best results. But another notable thing is that everyone had different losses of their bone mass density, and so it depends overall on the individual. And so I have a couple questions for you guys to open up and get your guys' opinions. So I was wondering, for example, if you were given the opportunity, knowing this these risks with bone mass density loss, if you were to go to Mars, would you go?
I don't think I personally would go, just because I'm not the very adventurous type. So going to Mars, it's going to be very tough. There's nothing there for us at the moment. We would be the first people there. So I don't want to get there and have no bones to be able to walk with, and then just kind of struggle there, because I won't be able to, get any help from my bone loss. Not go.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, these are definitely huge risks, and I'm not too sure myself if the reward isn't enough for the risk. Do any of you guys have any other thoughts?
I agree, similar to Isaac. I personally would need to see more advancement in science in order to keep your bones stronger and not have them weak, because it's very hard to be able to just go and then have those problems and get the help that you need to recover from that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a huge recovery time, a huge risk, and definitely a pain for the recovery. Avi, do you have any thoughts, or am I good to move on?
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely with what both Stephen and Isaac said. I mean, it's just a matter of time and technology development, you know what I'm saying? Before I would be comfortable enough to leave Earth and head into space. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously we watched the movie The Martian. And so did we see any efforts in that movie trying to combat this? And does that make the movie unrealistic if they don't?
I remember the scene, actually a couple scenes where they were in the gym on the ship, the Ares. So I think they made an effort to have the movie be realistic, because they did have quite an expansive gym, if I remember correctly, and the astronauts were in there in multiple scenes. So I think they knew about the risks to bone health, and they tried to make it as realistic as possible.
Yeah, no, those scenes were definitely huge.
Ignition sequence start. All engines are running.
We have taken tremendous steps.
We choose to go to the moon before this decade is out.
We have achieved the earth-shaking, the breathtaking, the groundbreaking,
One small step for man.
and left a mark in the heavens. Our successes build one upon another and amplify what is possible.
The dawn of Orion.
It's time we take the next great leap. We're building the next chapter of American exploration, returning to the moon to stay, so we can go beyond to Mars, to expand what's possible and further our understanding. The architecture for these missions is already taking shape. We will go with new systems, bold designs, and a sustainable mission. You can hear it, taste it, touch it. We are going. We are training, testing, pressing our pioneering spirit into every component, defining our resolve with every line of code, and securing our success with every welcomed partnership. This is not hypothetical. This is not about flags and footprints. This is about sustainable science and feeding forward the advance of the human spirit. Because we are the pioneers, the star sailors, the thinkers, the visionaries, the doers. And because we stand on the shoulders of the giants to go farther than humanity has ever been, we will add our names to the rolls of the greatest adventurers in history. Every day, every mission, we advance this calling. We are NASA. And after 60 years, we're just getting started.
All right, guys, we're back from the short break we had. Next up, Brett's gonna be walking us through muscles.
All right, yeah, for sure. We can go right to the next slide. And so obviously muscles are, again, very important. You need them to move, lift things, and they also help the blood pump through your body and, just also used to breathe. And so I think it's notable to note that Earth does have a force of 9.8 newtons. And this is huge considering this is what our bodies are used to and what our bodies make up for so we can stay healthy. And so humans have definitely evolved over time, and the change of environment to microgravity is huge. And so I found an article written by Scott Trape and others, and they shared a study done on astronauts who went to the International Space Station for 6 months. And they measured the calf muscle at the beginning and the end of the trip. They had access to various exercise machines, which you can see on the slide. And you can see there is a cycle ergometer and a treadmill and a resistance exercise device. The cycle ergometer is on your left. The resistance exercise device helps you keep force down on your legs so you can build those muscles, and then the treadmill just to keeping you active and keep those muscles working. You can also see the resistance exercise machine is also used by astronaut Lindgren on the International Space Station, and they worked out for 5 hours a week spread out over 5 days. And at the end of the trip, it was noted that there was a huge decrease in their peak performance and mass of the muscle, and their mass reduced 2 to 13% depending on the individual. It ranged on each individual, and then the peak power for all the astronauts averaged out to a decrease of 32%. All right, so I actually have a question for you guys. Do you guys think that longer length workouts, considering it's only 5 hours spread out over 5 days, do you think that would help combat these negative effects?
Well, if we're going based off of how it is on Earth, right? The longer you work out, right, the stronger you'll get, the bigger your muscles will be. So I think if it functions the same way in space, I think longer workouts definitely would be a good way to combat this, especially since there isn't really much else to do when you're on a multiple month journey across the cosmos.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I thought 5 hours spread out over 5 days was a little low. I thought they could have been working out much more, and I'd be interested to see in future studies how this could affect the results. Do you guys have any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I think like one of the most important things, like especially for exercise, would be like muscle recovery. And so maybe on space, muscle recovery works differently, and that's why you have to work out a little bit like less per average. Maybe muscle recovery is a lot like worse in space, obviously. So maybe that's why it's like a reduced amount of exercise time.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a big thing to consider. You definitely don't want to overwork your muscles, and injury could definitely set you back, and injury could, again, cause a huge loss in muscle health as well. And so in an article written by Michael Chung and others, some things noted to combat this are cortisol, nutrition, and vitamin D. Cortisol is a hormone that can help regulate muscle repair and keep your muscles healthy and the recovery time to a minimum. And nutrition, amino acids can enhance protein synthesis and minimize the muscle atrophy in space. And so we can move to the next slide. And so the real question is, why does bone and muscle health matter? So bone and muscles work together. It's a collaborative effort to keep you healthy and keeping us move and function. They protect our bodies and organs. Osteoporosis symptoms are hunchback, height loss, and bone breaks, which obviously can hinder your quality of life. And it can also cause back pain due to the weak bones. With muscle peak performance being reduced to 32%, it's a huge deal. You won't be able to get around as easily. It's going to take a long time to recover, and you will become much more fatigued. Another thing to note is these effects really only matter if you do come back to Earth. If you do stay in microgravity, your body has adjusted to that, but the adjustment back to Earth's gravity is the part that causes you problems. Okay. That kind of wraps up my section, and I'd like to hand it off to nutrition.
So I'll be basically focusing more on nutrition and fertility while in space travel. So a brief introduction to nutrition in spaceflight. So humans have adapted well to spaceflight, and over basically the last 40 years, we have kind of increased our understanding of the various physiological kind of changes that occur during and after spaceflight. However, there are underlying mechanisms for many of these alterations that remain unclear. Nutrition and food science research overlap with or are integral to many other aspects of space medicine and physiology, including our mental health, our sleep, our circadian rhythms, our taste and odor activities, our radiation exposure, and several other systems basically in our human body. Recent advances in genomics and proteomics are just beginning to be applied actually in space and biomedical research, and it is likely that a lot of these findings from such studies will be applicable to applied human nutritional sciences. So the U.S. Space Life Sciences Research Committee has recently developed a set of critical questions and a roadmap to clearly emphasize research efforts that will ultimately reduce to the human risk associated with space travel and habitation. So a lot of these relevant research has been conducted in space and on the ground using a lot of animal models and human ground-based analogs, which we will be discussing more later on. All right, so a brief background of nutrition in spaceflight. So according to the article by Professor Conventino called Planning Strategies for Development of Effective Exercise and Nutrition Countermeasures for Long Duration Spaceflight, research and development on food in space has kind of come a long way since the initial Mercury missions during the early 1960s, where basically the Mercury missions had the objective to just simply put humans into orbit in space. These short duration missions usually lasted around 34 hours and kind of didn't provide much incentive for research and development for nutritional food or storage systems. And so a lot of times what they utilized was these bite-sized cubes of high-calorie mixtures of protein, high melting point fat, sugar, and fruit or nuts. When longer missions started to come, such as the Gemini missions that last up to 14 days, this led to some development of food packaging and testing procedures to ensure that safety and nutritional requirements were met. So the Apollo missions in the late 1960s and early 1970s explored the use of dehydrated foods to decrease weight and volume in spaceships, making use of the water generated as a byproduct from the fuel cells on board to kind of rehydrate the foods while in orbit. The Skylab missions made use of refrigerators, freezers, and food warmers, boasting kind of a menu of 72 foods that cycled on a 6-day basis, which NASA used to record various metabolic studies. The current menu on board the International Space Station, actually from the year 2000 onward, is comprised of a 50-50 American and Russian food system, which consists of 200 foods and beverages, which is cycled on an 11-day basis. Although little research has been conducted on the optimum composition of dietary energy sources for spaceflight, there are currently a team of leading nutritionists and developed recommended nutritional guidelines to ensure adequate intake of nutrients for long duration spaceflight of up to 360 days, which entails a reference intake of protein of 0.8 grams per kilograms of body weight, 350 grams of carbohydrates, and 70 grams of fats per day. And these are just small recommendations. Let's look more into what is recommended, the daily recommended intakes for spaceflight. So when we look at the recommendations of nutrition, basically when it comes to spaceflight, we can look at the chart described below. And this chart basically is from the article written by Professor Slane and Professor Feedback in the article History of Nutrition in Spaceflight Overview. And when we look at the specific values, we understand that energy, it varies honestly between person to person, but it's around 3,500 calories per astronaut. The amount of protein they consume is approximately 12 to 15% of these total number of calories. Carbohydrates around 50% of these calories, and fat is around 35% of these calories. When it comes to specific fluid intake, it's around 2,000 milliliters per day, but again, varies person to person. When we look at all these various vitamins, we can see that vitamin A is around 1,000 micrograms, vitamin D is around 10 micrograms, vitamin E is around 20 milligrams of alpha tocopherol. And when it comes to vitamin K, we understand it's around 80 micrograms. For vitamin C, we understand it's 100 milligrams. For vitamin B12, it's around 2 micrograms. For vitamin B6, it's around 2 milligrams. And for all the various vitamin Bs, thiamine, riboflavin, folate, niacin, it's all in the various small amounts of micrograms and milligrams. And we can also see the various values for other minerals and minerals available and necessary for humans while in space travel. And yeah, let's go ahead and move on to some nutritional challenges and countermeasures for space travel. So here is just a brief and short summary provided by Professors Cahill and Hardiman in the article, Nutritional Challenges and Countermeasures for Space Travel, where the three main challenges are described as providing enough food for long duration missions without needing for resupply. Now, this is very important for long duration missions because currently we've only been able to have space travel for around a couple of weeks. We have not been able to have long-term kind of food supplies without needing to resupply like it is on the International Space Station or it is in the short-term space travels. Another challenge would be avoiding food spoilages and maintaining the nutritional content of this food. So a lot of the food that is traditionally healthy spoils very easily, and a lot of unhealthy food tends to not spoil so easily. So traditionally unhealthy food is given to prolong longevity of food. However, so this would obviously be a challenge to provide healthy food, nutritious food that doesn't spoil. And lastly, ensuring nutritional status and health of astronauts. Obviously, the astronauts cannot function or do their job if they're not healthy, and we can't keep them healthy. So this is, again, a very important challenge that we have to overcome when it comes to nutrition and space travel. When it comes to countermeasures, there are several that are given. And when we look at it, we can understand that more powerful rockets capable of increased food payload is obviously a good countermeasure. Innovative technology to decrease Earth dependency, including bioregenerative systems to grow crops or biotic biomass. And this can help with the avoiding food spoilages and maintaining nutritional content while not needing to resupply as well. This solves two problems automatically, while also providing nutritional food. Suspended animation to reduce nutritional needs. This just means less movement. It also recommends food with extended shelf life of 3 to 5 years. So for example, foods such as honey, cereals that don't spoil so easily, but still have some nutritional content with them. Developing food processing techniques to maintain nutrients, food with more bioavailable nutrients, and sensing devices to assess food quality so that food is not consumed where it is spoiled and not healthy to consume. All right. So let's move on to more of the reproductive hazards of space travel in women and men. And I focused on the article provided by Professor Mishra titled Reproductive Hazards of Space Travel in Women and Men. And a lot of the space travel exposes astronauts to multiple potential reproductive hazards, including radiation, which we've already majorly discussed as Stephen had beautifully explained earlier. But let's focus more on additional hazards. Which most significantly are microgravity and hypergravity. So when we look at long-term exposure to microgravity during low Earth orbit and simulated microgravity on Earth, we noticed there was decreased spermatogenesis, basically meaning less sperm was produced, and serum and testicular concentrations of testosterone were decreased in some studies and unchanged in others. And basically, this was found through an interesting experiment that was conducted on Earth on various rodents in labs where they were exposed to microgravity. And if you look at more results, we see that exposure to microgravity during the second half of pregnancy does not cause major disruptions of fetal development or parturition in rodents. And lastly, we do notice that exposure to hypergravity during mating and through the neonatal period decreases pregnancy rates and neonatal offspring survival in rodents.
All right, everyone. I think we've reached the end of the podcast. Make sure to follow us on our socials to know when the next podcast is. And until then, we'll see you guys later. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See ya. See ya.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to our podcast. These are the references we used. That first one is the advertisement we had from NASA, the different studies we looked at for bone density and loss in microgravity, and the impact of microgravity in the cardiovascular system. Another study looking at the cardiovascular system in space, how space radiation is a huge risk to astronauts, strategies to combat nutrition issues in space, potential solutions for radiation exposure, brief history of the nutrition in the history of spaceflight, how to mediate muscle atrophy, some more conversations on radioactivity in space, the hazards of space travel on the reproductive system, and NASA's potential solution to radiation in space. Then additionally, we discussed some more ways of how to shield astronauts from radiation, what heavy ions are and how they damage DNA, so continuing the radiation discussion. And then a study looking at skeletal muscles on the ISS. And finally, closing out here, the long-term effects of microgravity on muscles and how space radiation specifically can damage certain aspects of the body.